Shalom Aleichem, and I'll tell you what the page is. Such a rowdy class, I don't know how we ever get anywhere. We're actually studying Pirkei Avot according to the commentary of the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Judah Loew of Prague, in a beautiful book that was put together for us by Rabbi Tuvia Basser. And we're on page 75. That's where we're going to begin, down at the bottom of the page where he says, "For you do not know the reward given for the respective mitzvot." Let's actually read the whole Mishnah, okay? It's the very first one of chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot, where this is Rabbi, I believe. Let me make sure. Yeah, it's actually it's the very first one. Rabbi says, and the Rabbi, anytime it's just the reference to Rabbi, remember, this is a reference to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Judah the Prince, okay? So Rabbi says, which is the proper path that a man should choose for himself, whatever is a credit to himself and earns him the esteem of fellow men. And then he says, be as scrupulous in performing a minor mitzvah as in a major one, for you do not know the reward given for the respective mitzvot. All right? Then he goes on and says, calculate the loss due to a mitzvah against its reward, and the reward of a sin against its cost. Consider three things, and you will not come into the grip of sin. Know what is above you, an eye that sees, a watchful eye, an attentive ear, and all of your deeds are recorded in a book. Okay? All right. And so we had gotten to the place where we were looking at where he says, for you do not know the reward that is given for the respective mitzvot. For any mitzvah, you don't really know the reward. And the Maharal begins to explain that the reward for a mitzvah is commensurate with its ability to bring a person close to God, because that actually is the reward. All right? So the reward for a mitzvah is the more it brings you closer to Hashem. All right? He says, and it's entirely possible that a minor mitzvah, something we would regard as something very minor, brings a person closer to God than does a major one, something we would think of that was a big one. All right? There is no connection, he says, between how close the mitzvah itself brings a person to God and how difficult or how simple it is to do. That's why every one of them is important. By the same token, don't begin all of a sudden to concentrate on the minor ones and say that the major ones don't matter, all right? In addition, he says, to each mitzvah's own ability to bring us close to Hashem, there also is a reward for the effort that is extended to perform a mitzvah, like in how much it costs you, how hard it is to do, the cost that comes to you for doing it, all of those things. He says, we know that certain mitzvot, certain commandments, carry extra reward because they entail either exceptional effort or exceptional expense. He says, and this fact does not contradict the statement that you do not know the reward, because the Mishnah speaks only of the undisclosed reward for the mitzvah itself, and it's not speaking of the reward that comes for the effort that's required to do it. Negative mitzvot, meaning lo maseh, where Hashem says, do not do this and do not do that, okay? The negative mitzvot do not actually have an inherent reward, as do positive mitzvot. Their reward comes solely from the self-discipline and effort that their observance entails. Now, there's a note here, the note 3 at the bottom of the page, which says, one is given reward for observing a negative commandment when opportunity and temptation are present, and one disciplines his natural instincts. Also, you can look at it in the way that the reward for a negative mitzvah, something that says don't do, that reward is that it doesn't separate you from God, okay? And actually, just in the very fact that it disciplines yourself to resist the Yetzer Hara and to be obedient to Hashem also is going to bring you close. But personally, I think that when it's all said and done and we look at it, that there also is, it may be a lesser reward. We don't know. That's the whole thing. That's what Rabbi is trying to tell us. We actually don't know what the reward for the mitzvot are. We don't have a clue. So, because of that, you should do every one of them with the same enthusiasm and with the same meticulousness, whether it's a positive mitzvah or a negative one, whether it's a major mitzvah or a minor one. It doesn't matter. But this idea of the negative mitzvahs having a lesser reward, we can look at that from several different perspectives. They may even have a greater reward in that they keep us close to Him and don't allow us to be pulled away, don't allow us to be separated from Him. Okay. He says, it might appear that mitzvot, such as acts of kindness, which bring reward in both this world and the world to come, and we'll explain that in a second. He says, have a double reward and are an exception to the statement that you do not know what the reward is. But this is not so, because the total reward in both this world and in the next might not be greater than that of mitzvot, whose reward is only in the world to come. Okay, so he's saying that doesn't contradict the mitzvah. I want to read two places. One in, this also is coming from the Mishnah in Peah 1:1, which we say every morning, study every morning. Immediately after this is in the blessings of the Torah in any standard siddur. And the reason we look at them is because they're related, both of them are related to Torah study, but it's also because immediately we begin to study Torah after making the blessings for the Torah, okay? So in Mishnah Peah 1:1, these are the precepts that have no prescribed measure. In other words, that there's no limit set on how much you can do them. The corner of a field, all right? This is what must be left for the poor. So it's actually saying support for the poor. The first fruit offering, the pilgrimage, meaning going to Israel, going to Jerusalem, acts of kindness, and Torah study. They have no prescribed measure. You should do all of those things as much as possible that you can. And then in the Talmud, in Shabbat 127a, it goes on. These are the precepts, and this is what the Maharal was talking about here, whose fruits a person enjoys in this world. In other words, again, we're talking about cause and effect. These things are causes and they have an effect that can be enjoyed in this world, but whose principle, in other words, the real reward for the mitzvah itself remains intact. In other words, it's like putting money in the bank and you get the interest here. You get an interest payment on it here, but the real reward is in the world to come. They are the honor that is due to a father and a mother. Now remember what these are. You get the interest here, the principle remains intact for the world to come. The honor due to father and mother. Gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness. Early attendance at the house of study, morning and evening. Hospitality to guests. Visiting the sick. Providing for a bride. Escorting the dead. Absorption in prayer. Bringing peace between a man and his fellow man. And the study of the Torah is equivalent to them all. In other words, Torah study actually includes all of them. Very interesting. Okay. All right, now back to the Maharal. He says, in fact, that's the next thing he wants to talk about. He says, although we do not know how to calculate the reward for mitzvot, we do know that the reward for Torah study actually exceeds the reward for other mitzvot, okay? This is because Torah study does what? It brings us close to God more effectively than any other mitzvah. Now hold your place there, because I'm departing from the Maharal and giving you something from another place in the Talmud. And we're going to see it, by the way, in Pirkei Avot also. Rabbi Yehuda Lev Ashlag, in his introduction to the Zohar, the Baal HaSulam, points out that the Talmud, when it talks about Elisha, the prophet, Elisha, okay, that it doesn't say Elisha Hanavi, the great Torah scholar. It says Elisha, he was the one who poured water on the hands of Elijah, on the hands of Eliyahu Hanavi. And then he goes on to talk about how service is actually more important than Torah study. And I told you it was from the Baha Sulam in his introduction to the Zohar. It's not. It's in a speech that he made at the conclusion of his commentary on the Zohar. It's in this speech. And what he is talking about there is that, and what the rabbis of the Talmud are talking about, is if a person can study Torah, and it's absolutely essential, we're commanded to do it, it's one of the mitzvot, and it brings us, just like the Maharal said, closer to God than anything else. But that's only if it produces something in us that we do what the Torah is telling us to do. Because the service that we do, the active mitzvot of helping other people, of sharing with other people, of being good to other people, and of pleasing Hashem, and in this case, like what Elisha did, he served his rabbi, okay? He poured water on the hands of Eliyahu. That actually is the way Elisha is remembered. He is remembered for his service, and not even for any of the great acts that he did, not for any of the great miracles that he accomplished. He's remembered for that service, because that, honestly, we can, if we're studying Torah all the time, but it doesn't lead to us doing, it doesn't lead to us serving, then what are we doing? We're studying Torah for our own sake alone. We're not studying Torah for its own sake. Right. We're just studying it for what intellectually we can get out of it. And that does not actually bring us close to Hashem. It actually moves us farther away. Okay? All right. So I wanted to make that clear just a little bit from me. Okay. Now he comes to the part where it says, calculate the loss due to a mitzvah against its reward. Let the Maharal explain. He explains it better than most people I've ever seen. The loss, he says, that's due to fulfilling a positive commandment, a commandment to do, is the effort or the expense that is required to fulfill it. That's the loss that you have. It costs you money. It costs you time. It costs you sweat. It costs you something. So there's a loss. He says the loss due to not transgressing a negative commandment, that loss is the pleasure that it would have provided to you. That's what you lose. That temporary thing, okay? So he's saying calculate the loss that's due to a mitzvah against its reward. Now, the next thing that he says, and the reward of a sin against its cost. The reward of a sin is what? The pleasure that the transgression offers. And if a sin wasn't offering pleasure, nobody would sin. Okay? And nobody ever said it wasn't fun to sin. But it's temporary. It's a temporary fun that always then becomes a cause and always has another effect. In fact, usually many effects that are very long lasting. The cost of a sin is the lost reward. What it costs you is that reward that now you've lost, which God would have bestowed upon you for observing His commandment. So what Rabbi is actually talking about here, what Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi is talking about, is there really is, to do the mitzvot is going to cost you something. There is a loss involved, but there is a reward involved. And to sin, there's a reward for sin, but there's also an unbelievable cost to it too. He's trying to bring that out, okay? He says, how can we weigh the reward against the loss if we do not know the reward? Okay? How can we actually do that? The evaluation, the Maharal says, is easy. The loss that is due to a mitzvah is sustained in this world, and it's only money, or it's only effort, or it's only the discomfort, temporary discomfort of self-discipline, of not doing something you want to do. Such a loss, he says, is far outweighed by the eternal. It's temporary, in other words. The loss that's due to a mitzvah is something that's very temporary. It's only money, time, or effort, or pleasure. Such a loss is far outweighed by the eternal, now, something that's going to go on forever, reward of a mitzvah in the world to come, which transcends any experience in the world, as the rabbis have said. And he actually quotes from Pirkei Avot on farther, chapter 4, Mishnah 22, where the rabbis say, better 1 hour of the spiritual tranquility in the world to come than the entire life of this world. 1 hour there is better than however long you lived and whatever pleasure you got out of this world. Because honestly, we know that that's true, but we don't have a clue. The reward for fulfilling a positive commandment, he says, is immense. And exercising self-discipline in the face of temptation brings also great reward for observing a negative commandment as well. All right. Now, he wants to say a few other things on this topic. Calculate the loss due to a mitzvah against its reward and the reward of a sin against its cost. He says this advice actually seems to advocate performing the commandments for the sake of their reward, in contradiction of, remember what we studied before from Antigonus of Soko, who told us, be not like a servant who serves their master for the sake of receiving a reward, where actually Antigonus of Soko is actually telling us very, very clearly we have to begin this correction process of our will to receive for ourselves alone, of what's in it for me. So what the rabbi, or what Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi here is saying, seems to be in contradiction to that. Now we're concentrating on rewards all of a sudden. In reality, the Maharal says, though, our Mishnah does not consider reward to be the purpose. That's not the purpose behind observing the mitzvot. It simply uses the fact that there is a reward as a practical strategy, all right? And because it knows it's still dealing with us, and it knows we're still operating from the will to receive for ourselves alone. So it's a practical strategy to deal with lethargy and also temptation. Because ideally, as all of the Torah teaches us, the motivation to observe the mitzvot should clearly be the love of Hashem, the love of God. All right? So it's not in contradiction here. But it's a practical strategy to us when we get to be couch potatoes and don't want to get up and do. Or we don't see any, why am I doing it anyway? Why am I doing it? I mean, it's a practical strategy to move you in the area of doing it, until you really get your will to receive for yourself alone corrected, and then this is not a problem at all. In fact, the very next thing that he's going to tell us is also, on one level, it's a practical strategy, and on another level, it's absolutely unbelievable what it's actually saying. Let's look at it. He wants to talk about these 3 exhortations that Rabbi makes in this Mishnah, which number 1 is be as scrupulous, okay? The next one, calculating the loss. And then the last one, considering 3 things, those 3 things to keep in mind. These 3 exhortations, he says, address the reasons for which people do not adequately observe the Torah. 1, lack of motivation. They're not motivated to do it. 2, concern for loss. Oh, it's going to cost me. It's going to cost me money. It's going to cost me time. It's going to, I just don't have time to fool with that. And the temptation of pleasure. Physical, temporal pleasure. Be scrupulous in performing a mitzvah, he says, addresses indifference to the chance to do a mitzvah because of a belief that the reward for doing the mitzvah is probably insignificant anyway. It's probably, how do I know what it is? We don't know. We don't have a clue. Well, it may be, this guy says it may be not so big. It may be just something totally insignificant. Calculate the loss of a mitzvah against its reward, he says, addresses the willingness to let the opportunity to do a mitzvah pass because it is too difficult or it's too expensive to fulfill. Then consider 3 things enables one to control, he says, the passion that is aroused by any opportunity to sin. he goes on, he says, now concerning this final piece of advice of Rabbi, where he says, consider three things and you will not come into the grip of sin. Know what is above you, all right? This is Rabbi's third item of advice to help us, I'll speak in a minute, observe the commandments properly. A person may prefer to have enjoyment now and to forego the future reward for resisting sin. He could even lose sight of the punishment, that the effect, in other words, that will derive and come from the transgression. And constant awareness that Hashem, the King of the universe, observes human deeds and remembers them all, can keep one from the grasp, he says, of sin. Ayin ro'ah, a watchful eye, an eye that sees, okay? The expression a watchful eye means that Hashem sees human action, actually he sees it at the human level. The use of the singular eye rather than eyes, he says, indicates vision rather than actual eyes, because Hashem doesn't have eyes. But this is saying that he still sees. He sees exactly what we're doing. And this statement, he says, rejects the notion that Hashem does not know what's going on the earth. Some people actually think that. You know, God's absentee anyway. He put everything in motion. He's taken a vacation. Maybe he'll come back someday. And he shouldn't have left the universe in the hands of such bad managers, okay? So this statement completely rejects that notion that Hashem is somehow disconnected from us and from this world. Then, ve'ozen shomat, and an ear that listens, that hears, that picks up everything. The image, he says, of a watchful eye has already conveyed to us that God knows what we do. But the additional metaphor of an attentive ear conveys to us that Hashem, he actually cares about what we do or don't do. He cares about it. He says, and this statement is coming to reject the idea that Hashem does not concern himself with human affairs. He concerns himself with absolutely everything. We know that. Now, and all your deeds are recorded in a book. In the future, Hashem will judge us on everything that we have done, and our deeds are recorded just like a storekeeper keeps an account book, and the total is evaluated at the end. In the minutes that we have left, I want to also mention that the great Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, and we've talked about this before, if we actually read this in Hebrew, he says, da, no. Ma lemala mimcha. No, da, ma. Know what lemala is above you. And then it says mim, or is above. Know what is above. Mimcha. If we look at this very, very literally, even though it does mean exactly this, know what is above you, it actually says, know that everything that's above and that's coming to you, mimcha, it comes from you. Okay? Because as the Ramchal has taught us so very, very well, a human being really is a wild card in determining how the universe operates. And what is coming to us is actually, and what is above us is actually, meaning the roots that are connected to us and coming to us, all of those things, it really is coming from us. It's coming from what? From everything that we think, everything that we say, everything that we do. And so people say, well, why is the world in such a sorry shape? Because a lot of us aren't thinking and speaking and acting correctly. You know what this does? The Ramchal also explained that, if you'll remember. I keep hearkening back to Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto and in such works as Derek Hashem and the Way of God, because we've studied it so much. But you remember, he tells us very, very clearly that all of these actions, thinking, speaking, doing, they either add to the side of uncleanness or they add to the side of holiness. And all of the universe is above us, and it's manifested back in this world. So if I'm thinking incorrectly, I'm speaking incorrectly, and I'm doing incorrectly, this is all adding to the side of uncleanness, which is like saying we are polluting everything. We add to the side of toxicity, of things that are toxic. we hurt all the universes above us, and we even damage the roots. And that is then reflected back down into this universe in the branches, and that's why the world is in such a bad shape. That's why things unbelievably terrible happen. That's why people get sick. That's why it's all coming from what? From us. It comes from us, just like this says, Da, ma, lima, la, mimcha. Know that what's above you and coming down to you is from you. But that has, because we're all connected, that has an effect in the entire world. And this is what the Baal HaSulam is talking about transformation from the fear of sin. A person comes to the realization that what he thinks, says, and does, it's going to affect him, but it's not just him that it affects. It affects the entire universe, this physical universe, the spiritual side of this physical universe, and all of the spiritual universes that are above us. And then some people wonder why holy angels who are in control of the forces of destruction in the universe, why they would not like to wipe us out. Why they would not, because they can't even begin to imagine why we think, say, and do the things we do, because it shows absolutely no honor for Hashem whatsoever. And such creatures shouldn't be allowed to exist. They're a menace. They're a total menace to not just society, but to all the world and all the universes. This is an important thing that we'll have to talk about more later on. And this is part of what the rectification work of the temple service does, and it's part of what the rectification work of actually prayer does. Is to balance these things back out, where we don't destroy ourselves, where we don't because it's coming from us. All of those things. Okay. All right. I'll get off my high horse here and let's go on. Know what is above you, a watchful eye and attentive ear, and all your deeds are recorded in a book. And the Maharal says these are three fundamentals of Jewish belief. What are those fundamentals? God knows our actions, number one. Number two, He is very concerned about them. And number three, He rewards and He punishes. All right? Awareness, he says, of these principles, that is what keeps us away from the grasp of being caught and held in transgression. Okay. Now, I think we'll finish the next one, the next part, his last comments on this, before we come to actually Mishnah number 2 of chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot. But the next thing he's talking about is where it says, and all your deeds are recorded in a book, and he's going to give us a couple of examples here, or a couple of ways of looking at that. The book is you. That's one way. You are the book, your life, all your experiences of life. That is the book. Another way of looking at it is actually talking about the impact, what we were just speaking of, the impact of our thoughts, speech, and deeds upon the entire world, and that impact upon the world and world history. It's like the life of the world also is the book. Okay. In fact, he even says that's exactly what Moshe Rabbeinu, when Moshe Rabbeinu told Hashem, he says, and if you're not going to accept these people back, okay, he says, erase me please from your book, which you have written. And he's saying that actually refers to the cumulative image of the entire world. In other words, the book is the world itself, and human deeds make their mark on the world, and they leave their mark on the person himself. So that's a couple of different ways he's going to look at that, but let's look at that together again the next time we're together and pick up there. If we don't get anything other than this one little thing about, I don't want you to be concerned about rewards for mitzvot and all those things, because hopefully we're beyond that level of having to have continually positive feedback all the time that we're going to get something out of it, okay? But this idea of know what is above you, and as Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin, which Rabbi Richmond showed me this, I would have never seen it, I would have never caught it on my own. He showed it to me from Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin's, his book, Nefesh HaChaim, The Living Soul, where that great rabbi states very, very clearly this mimcha is coming from you. And that's actually a life-changing perspective if you get a hold of it. It really is. And it also cuts down on a whole lot of our griping and complaining and all this about how God is such a bad manager of the universe, you know. This idea. Okay. So, Toda Rabbah, I thank you very much. And we'll pick up right here again the next time we're together, okay? Shalom uvracha, peace and a blessing. Bye-bye.